Nearly 100 companies, including Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Uber, Twitter, and Netflix, have filed an amicus brief opposing Trump's immigration ban. Whether or not you believe the ban is immoral or unconstitutional, it will surely have an effect on Silicon Valley. Joining us to talk about the ban and the changes to the HP1 Visa policy is Michael Coren from Quartz. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thank you.
So first, who are some of the big names in Silicon Valley who are immigrants?
Well, actually, there's quite a few. They tend to have founded a number of companies. So Uber, Tesla, Intel, Elon Musk is from South Africa, and I think about almost $500 million startups that are now private are actually founded by immigrants.
So yeah, this is it's an amazing and it's going to have a huge effect. You say even rumors of the changes to the program, to the HP1 Visa program, or even to the immigration ban have made tech stocks tank. What do we know already about the draft of the changes to the HP1 Visa policy?
Well, everything's up for grabs. Right now, the preliminary language has talked about actually reducing the number of visas that would be available, removing any spousal privileges to work, increasing the salary caps or floors. So you have to pay up to $100,000 or more dollars. Some of the more extreme versions actually required a PhD and 10 years of experience, which would essentially kill the visa for most people. There have been a couple bipartisan bills that weren't more executive orders that were actually far more supportive. They did try to say they'll give preference to people who paid more, and I think a lot of tech companies would be okay with that. But from the White House, most of the both the suggestions and then the clauses have been pretty restrictive.
So what do you say to people who argue that tech companies have been abusing this HP1 visa, that they've been abusing it to just hire cheaper labor? What do you say to people who make that argument?
Well, I think they're right, but only in a very limited situation. It's definitely not the case for everyone. And so you have a few cases where I think we saw this with Disney. We saw this even with several tech companies, but we haven't seen this as the norm for every company. There's quite a few that hire directly really talented workers, and then they're able to sort of go from an H-1B to something that's more permanent, like a green card, and then start their own companies, although that's a very long and difficult process. So it's definitely not as simple as this is a way to lower U.S. wages. I think on net, there's quite a bit of benefits, if not certainly for the country as a whole, and that most of the suggestions that have come out of this, the abuse investigations, have been about fixing that particular aspect of it.
Now, the list, the list of companies that are involved with this amicus brief is pretty intense. I mean, it's right around 100 different companies. Mm-hmm. Big name companies. There's some notable absentees from the list. Amazon, for one, Oracle, IBM. Do we have any idea why, if there was this huge unifying call with all these companies, why those weren't on the list?
So we don't know for sure, but Amazon has come out and said they're going to file their own, I think, separately in a different case. So I'm not quite sure on that. On IBM and Oracle tends not to get involved with these at all. They're probably one of the most conservative companies in the space. IBM has been advising Trump. I believe Gina Coletti is on one of has either had an informal relationship or something more formal, and they've been also very, very conservative. So it's not clear that they're willing to actually get involved the way that Silicon Valley tech companies are, most likely because their workforce is putting less pressure, honestly, on the executives.
Got it.
So in your piece, you talk about, you quote Sam Altman, who tweeted that the tech community is powerful. And we've seen them, donate, really open their wallets, donate to the ACLU. And the ACLU obviously has been doing a lot of the real work. I mean, this is where a lot of this has to be when we're talking about an executive order. It has to be, people have to take this to court, and the ACLU has been really stepping up. So obviously donations will help that. But do you see them as being powerful in other ways in this fight?
So they're in a really interesting position. I think the executives of these major tech companies are for the first time facing somewhat of a revolt from their employees, and in a coordinated way. So they actually do have quite a bit of power. but they're also in a rock and a hard place. They are trying not to essentially piss off the White House and most of I think what Trump plans to do that might be in their favor. And at the same time, their workforce is enraged. At least there are thousands and thousands of workers who are willing to walk off the job if they don't see that their companies are standing up for the values that they said they are, that they support. So while I think they do have a lot of power in terms of influence, jobs and then access to the White House, I also think that they don't have a lot of room to maneuver.
And so you also wrote about the International Entrepreneurs Rule. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So this was an Obama-era rule that was made, and it was a workaround because Congress wasn't able to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And the goal was, how do we get the best entrepreneurs who are willing to start companies in the United States to come, found their company, and then make more jobs? Pretty simple. And the workaround they came up with was something called a parole. So they gave the Department of Homeland Security the ability to give sort of discretionary access to these entrepreneurs to come to the United States. That was introduced in the Federal Register late last year. And for procedural reasons, it's not a done deal. And it now looks like it won't happen. Obviously, it was a big push for Silicon Valley to get that through, and it looks like it may not happen.
And what about the digital service, the startup-inspired digital service? That was something also that doesn't look, the future of that doesn't look promising either. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We may be surprised by that. So the U.S. digital service is probably one of the bright spots we've seen in the federal government in the last 48 years. It came out of the healthcare.gov disaster, and they pulled in a bunch of really talented people from Google and Facebook and other companies. They put Humpty Dumpty back together again. That site has worked quite well since then. And from that initiative they started the U.S. Digital Service, which is a mixture of teams that can go in and any agency and either work like a SWAT team where they fix tech problems really quickly, or they could work on a longer-term agency basis. We're actually seeing a fair amount of surprisingly bipartisan support, especially from the Republican side. But the executive orders that Trump has issued, the hiring freeze, may actually put the kibosh on them because they actually have to hire people constantly since they're on shorter term contracts. So unless that's lifted and there's a strong Republican support for USDS, it may be a risk.
Is there anything to look forward to in terms of, are there any bright spots in this? You say we might be surprised. That was some optimism there, but is there anything, any good news?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what I'm hearing is, at least on the Republican side from the USDS, is that they haven't, that their support internally, it just hasn't made its way up to the top, and that those decisions, or at least the implication that groups like that might see a reduction, could actually turn around and be quite positive. The immigration story is changing every day. And there's been such a pushback from Silicon Valley, and even, I think, from the business community at large, that you may see a reversal or a much finer tailoring of immigration restriction, so that you'll see, at least on the sort of skilled technical immigration side, a more liberal policy. But I'm not willing to make any predictions on any of this.
So do you think that, I guess you said you wouldn't predict, but do you think there's possibility that the HP1 Visa policy might follow the same way, that it might be reformed instead of just eliminated?
Yeah. I think the H-1B visa program actually has potential if there are certain bipartisan proposals are adopted. I think it has the potential to be reformed, and if not expanded, at least to be preserved and the potential for abuse reduced. And so I've seen in the last 2 weeks a ton of legislative activity that's basically put those bills on the table. They're now sitting in Congress waiting for White House input. And once the White House gives a green light to something and it looks like it might pass, then I think there's definitely potential for a positive outcome. Elon Musk is on the president's advisory board, and he's made that one of his priorities. So yeah, I think if there were areas to be hopeful about, that could be one of them.
Well, thank you so much. Michael J. Coren is a reporter at Quartz, and you report on startups and a little bit of politics when it revolves around technology. What else is your beat?
So I cover the culture of Silicon Valley, startups, technology, venture, and in the last 2 months, I've become much more of a politics and tech reporter. So I spent the last 2 weeks in DC, and I'm now reporting on all sorts of intersections between, the future of politics and democracy and technology.
Well, thank you so much. MJ Coren on Twitter, MJ_Coren on Twitter to follow Michael's work. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Take care.